I started writing a standard operating procedure for how I believed the old guard could move out towards H2F. Did it, it took about 2 weeks to write it. It was maybe 20 pages. And one day I took it down to the brigade commander and I said, sir, this is an Army program. We need to do this. This is how I believe we should do it. And I've been doing it for a long time. And that's been my job ever since.
He was receptive to that.
Yeah.
What
Nice.
rank were you at the time you put that on his desk?
A specialist.
Hey, team, welcome back to another week here with Drew and Alex, another week of Mops and Mo's. And before we kick off, I've had a headache all day because I didn't have caffeine this morning. I tried the decaf.
Ooh, now
Yeah.
he knows.
No, I'd done it before and it was fine. I didn't really notice a difference at all. And then today I did it almost like without thinking about it. And then halfway through the day, I was like, my head has been hurting all day. And then
So did
later
you just
on,
go from a normal caffeine consumption
yeah,
to cold turkey?
yeah, I just because I've
Yeah.
always had decaf coffee like on the side and figured, sure, why not? Because and I ran out of regular coffee.
People seem very interested in like decisions around caffeine because I post on the Instagram sometimes that I'm going off of caffeine for a month or a few months or something like that. And people are always fascinated by that
Well, it's
phenomenon.
like, I mean, if you're struggling with like, not even struggling, like if stress or anxious, like any of that kind of stuff, it is amazing how much caffeine just like puts that into hyperdrive. And then when you don't have caffeine, it's like, oh, I feel pretty chill. Minus the fact
I
my head hurts.
the biggest thing I notice when I'm off caffeine is a more consistent energy level throughout the day. Like it's not going up and down as much, and then better sleep quality overall. Like my energy levels overall just seem better when I'm off caffeine. I say that I'm currently having a cup of coffee a day. I don't know.
There's something about I don't know, the feeling around coffee though that I like.
There is something around the feeling of coffee, but like decaf doesn't do it. Like it scratches the itch a little bit, but it's not the same.
It
And decaf
smells
coffee
the
is
same.
always terrible. It smells the same,
Well,
but it's not as good.
that's fair. I mean, caffeine's definitely a hard charger. Speaking of hard chargers, who are we talking to today?
And this is overdue. He should have been on here a long
Very
time
overdue.
ago. Yeah, we're having Spencer Posey. If you are in the military human performance space and you don't know Spencer Posey, honestly, what are you doing?
Google him.
Uh, yeah, you gotta,
He's bigger
you're
than
way
you.
behind. He is definitely bigger than you. I should probably read his bio, but then we can talk about why we had him on. Spencer sent me a bio because we asked for a bio from all our guests. What's in front of me is for sure not a bio. It's just a list of the many jobs he currently has. Not a list of past jobs, just all of the jobs he's currently doing. And we'll list them out because there are a bunch, looks like half a dozen. Most notably, and kind of what we talked about in the whole episode, he's the Regimental Holistic Health and Fitness Lead for the 3rd U.S. Infantry Regiment, the Old Guard.
For people who don't know what the old guard is, think Arlington Cemetery, Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, Washington, D.C., ceremonial band, etc.
You got it. Being in DC and being a hard charger, as Drew mentioned, he also worked his way into a higher echelon role. He's the human performance lead for the military district of Washington. So that's joint, like any military activity going on in DC. He's a holistic health and fitness champion for the United States Air Force Lifestyle and Performance Medicine Group. There's some deep irony to the fact that I now work for the Department of the Air Force and am not a part of that group, and Spencer works for the Army and is a part of that group. So I probably have some homework to do. He's an individual investigator for Walter Reed Army Institute of Research. Honestly, I really wanted to dig into that with him, and we ran out of time on the episode. So maybe if we have him back later, we can find out more about what he's doing with Walter Reed. He's a current instructor at the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College for Holistic Health and Fitness. I know more about this than I should, but I'll share a little. They just handpicked really awesome coaches out there to teach future senior commanders, and he was one of the ones who got picked. And finally, he's a national spokesperson for the U.S. Army Be All You Can Be campaign. You may have seen a fantastic ad from him, I think on CBS. He was on a nationally televised ad. I will drop a YouTube link to that ad in the show notes. It will get you motivated.
And I think it's okay that you don't have a huge bio because, in truth, we spend the first 20, 30 minutes ish of the episode sort of talking through Spencer's history to arrive at the point we are now, which is essentially what got him interested in doing this type of thing. Because as you guys will hear, a lot of what has been created in the military district of Washington as pertains to human performance was done strictly because Spencer wanted to do it and took the initiative, met all the right people, put himself into all the right places. And one of the reasons we wanted to have him on, one, because his story's fantastic. He's an awesome dude. But two, because so often we hear people talk about how they can't do something or there's this barrier or that barrier. And I think here is a classic example of what you actually can accomplish. One, if you're bigger than everybody, but two, if you actually have a good head on your shoulders and push through some of those doors. So it's a fascinating story.
And we haven't mentioned rank yet, I think, in explaining who Spencer is.
Yeah.
You might assume a certain rank based on that bio. As you'll hear, he started this whole thing as a specialist. He is currently a sergeant, not a
Mhm.
staff sergeant, not a sergeant first class, a sergeant who is wildly outkicking his coverage in terms of just massive impact on everything going on around DC when it comes to the military.
And he'll say this too in the episode, but if anything he talks about kind of piques your interest, and for folks out there that are sort of trying to do the same thing, he's very reachable and he gives his information. We'll put it in the show notes too. So if something sticks, you're curious to hear more, you can obviously reach out to us, but don't hesitate to reach out to him either. So yeah, enjoy. All right, I have a question for you. And I know I've asked you this before, but I think a lot of people don't know it. Can you explain what the Old Guard is?
Sure. The Old Guard, the 3rd Infantry Regiment, is the Army's oldest active infantry regiment and the Army's only ceremonial unit. So our medals and mission essential task list, first and foremost, is mortuary affairs. So we handle all of the funerals in Arlington National Cemetery. So putting all of our brothers and sisters to rest. Pretty solemn, very honorable job. Perfection and precision is pretty high in the cemetery. And, we are pretty much the last touch point that a family has with the service and their family member, their loved one. So that's our first mission central task. And the second is ceremonies and special events. So we handle all the ceremonies and special events in the National Capital Region, White House missions, Pentagon, Capitol, and a variety of other ceremonial flag, color guard missions across the National Capital Region. And then third is DISCA, Defense Supportive Civil Authorities. And generally what that means is just defending critical infrastructure. Say another January 6th happens, we deploy out into the National Capital Region to defend critical infrastructure to national security. And then fourth, if we have the time, is practice our profession, which is mainly that of infantrymen. I would say about 90% of our formation, probably a little bit higher, is infantrymen, and 60% of that formation being first-term soldiers coming out of OSUT, especially with the inauguration coming up. We handle that. So a lot of our soldiers, sign up to shoot, move, and communicate, and they come up here and get tasked with a completely different mission. So it's a big spin, big change, a very unique unit.
Wait, I didn't realize that guys go right out of basic into the series. I thought, because I'm thinking of Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, which you just sort of like gracefully glossed over, because that falls into you guys' portfolio as well. I thought that type of thing you had to kind of like, I don't know if assess is the right word, but I didn't realize guys were coming right out of basic.
Yes, I mean the tomb. So we have some specialty platoons for sure, and I did cross over that. I'll touch on that. We have the Fife and Drum Corps, and they wear very ceremonial 1776 uniforms. They're musicians. We have the U.S. Army Drill Team, which does all the precision rifle movements. They do it at the Super Bowl and different sporting events. We have Continental Color Guard, which also do they do the colors for, let's say, Army Navy game, Indy 500, NCAA championship, things like that. We have the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, and that is currently a branch of material, and you can apply to go there. Be a member of the tomb, male, female. The assessment process takes approximately 9 to 12 months for a soldier to be able to walk on the plaza and become a sentinel. So yeah, we have a unique, and that's 4th Battalion. So we have 2 battalions. 1st Battalion does all the funerals in Arlington National Cemetery, and 4th Battalion does all the ceremonies and special events. So small brigade-sized element. Although we are a regiment, 06 level command, and about roles between 1,500 and 2,000 individuals at any time.
So I think we will absolutely come back to the old guard and the work you're doing in the old guard with health and fitness stuff. But I want to lay a little bit of groundwork before we get there. And you know this, we don't normally have guests introduce themselves, but this is a little bit biographical. Did some background research on you, get to know you a little better before we brought you on the pod. And I have two questions. Well, first, I stumbled upon a fantastic video from Army Recruiting Ohio celebrating your enlistment, and that is what spurred these two questions for me. Question one, you had a fantastic beard in that video. Do you miss it now that you're on active duty?
Absolutely. I had a beard for the better part of a decade. And when I had to take it off, it took me at least 2 weeks to figure out who I was in the mirror. It was awful.
Did you cry? Were there tears?
I did not. There were not tears, but
Okay.
it's close. I was sad. Yeah.
I'll see if we can work in a Spencer Posey beard picture into some of the Instagram content in preparation for this episode.
Perfect.
The second question, though, the second question is where we're going to get a little bit more biographical. And I've known you for a little bit now, but I didn't know kind of all of your background. And if I'm not mistaken, your path involved serving in the National Guard. And then it sounds like separating from the National Guard, working in the fitness industry, competing in bodybuilding, doing some coaching, getting at least one bachelor's degree, possibly two in nutrition and physiology, and then coming on to active duty in your current role. Is that roughly accurate? Can you fill in the blanks there?
Sure. So yeah, we'll go back a little bit further. My first term of service was from 2008 to 2011 in the North Dakota National Guard. That journey of service was spurred by my father. So my father worked for the Army Corps of Engineers. He was the chief health and safety officer for the Green Zone in Iraq from 2005 to 2008. And he encouraged me to get into service and to see what I could do there, and joined the North Dakota National Guard as an SMP cadet, so simultaneous membership. So I went to basic and AIT and as a 14 Sierra Air Defense Artillery. And I started college at the University of North Dakota in January of 2009. And if you back up about 30 days, my dad had come home from Iraq for some rest and recovery, and he was diabetic type 2, and had some blood clots on the way home. Got a CAT scan, ended up finding stage 4 pancreatic cancer, and he died. What was it? 66 days later. I had to take a hard knee in life at that point. I was 19. I just moved across the country and started school. Had no support system. Was away from friends and family. And I remember at the time he was here. He was in medical care here in Baltimore, Maryland, and he was at Johns Hopkins Sidney Kimmel Cancer Center. And I went to see him. I got to see him twice before he passed, which was challenging. And I went to see him one time and came home, and I remember his oncologist reminded me of Doogie Howser. He might have been 26. But at the time, I was starting to get a brief understanding of physiology, and to me, everything starts at the cell, right? And so I said, hey, if my dad is a diabetic, right, and he has dysfunction at the cellular and then the tissue and then the organ level, can we say that this is causation, that type 2 diabetic has a higher predisposition for pancreatic cancer, and this is what led to ultimately his death? And he said, no, we can't say that. We don't know. And this was 2009, early 2009, and that just shook me all kinds of wrong ways. That he basically told me we didn't know how that happened to him and whatnot. And so yeah, I had to take a hard knee from life. What happened is I felt like I was treading water. Wasn't a resilient human. Didn't have the holistic skills, I guess you could say, as I do, as an established adult. Barely, kept my head above water in school. Ended up coming home and kind of regrouping, if you will, and started to find a passion in the gym. And I'd always enjoyed training and bettering myself physically, and had started trying to understand and learn about, the body and training. Did a very easy NASM cert, right? And started bodybuilding myself and started tweaking around with some friends and their progression and programming, and found an easy knack for it. Started getting, I guess, recruited, if you will, by a local bodybuilding coach, and he had a team, and he was like, "Hey, you seem to be pretty good at this. Why don't you come on the team? Why don't you start coaching people?" And I said yeah, and started to do it and enjoyed it. So that was Team Warrior Within here in Columbia, Maryland, and started doing that, putting people on stage and learning and doing a lot of continuing education. That's when I started to learn from the late great Charles Poliquin. I got to do some of his courses. I met him many times, learned from him personally, quite a few occasions at his institute. And in my continued search for continuing education to better my knowledge and understanding, I ended up finding, I guess you could say it was a DVD of a physician who lived in Ohio. His name is Dr. Eric Serrano. And this DVD was awful quality, but the stuff he was talking about was, to me, it seemed like he was either 10 years ahead of his time or he was crazy. So I reached out to him, and Dr. Serrano was a very prominent figure in human performance, especially medicine. Had worked with the MLB, had been head medical officer for what's that? What was that supplement company? It was green. It had a green label.
Green label.
Pharma.
First Farm?
No, it was green because First Form's blue. Anyway, very, very prominent guy, head medical officer for the Arnold Sports Festival in Columbus. When all the big bodybuilders would come into Columbus for that, he'd see them. But anyway, so I reached out to him and emailed him, and I said, "Hey, I'd love to learn." Right. And he responded verbatim, "You're just a stupid bodybuilder. I don't have time for that."
What?
Okay. Right. So I was persistent. I kept emailing him. Didn't really respond. So one day I called his office, and he had a family practice. His wife and him are both physicians, and got an appointment. So I woke up early one morning, drove from Maryland to Ohio to get an appointment with him, and I got put into one of his patient rooms, and I walked in, and there was a mural of the Incredible Hulk on the wall. And I was like, "Is this guy a pediatrician?" And so I'm waiting in there, and he comes in. He's this charismatic Puerto Rican guy, unkempt hair, wearing a Jesus Saves t-shirt, shorts, untied shoes with a massive black German Shepherd at his side. And, he goes, "Hey, I'm Dr. Strong." And, we start talking, and that was my first contact with what I believe holistic health is. So we spent 90 minutes talking about every aspect of my life, and he put it all on a whiteboard. He talked about my relationships, my finances, my social skills, the way I train, the way I eat, my religion, and he made it this big circle. And this was 2015, and I left there after he spent 90 minutes with me. It was the most amount of time any physician has ever spent. And just given today's medical world, they just don't have time for that.
Wait, I gotta ask you, at some point in this interaction, did you tell him like, "Hey, I'm the stupid bodybuilder"?
Oh yeah, he immediately knew.
Yeah,
when he saw my chart. Yeah. When he saw my chart, he was like, "I know your name." Anyway, I had a great 90 minutes with him, and he invited me to have lunch with him after that, and we did. And I said, "I really want to learn." He said, "Well, I have physicians coming to do internships. I have a long list of people who want to learn. So, I'll add you to my email list." So he had an email list of maybe 60 people deep. It was some of the smartest minds in the world, physicians, lawyers, strength coaches, and they would just discuss research. So he said, I put papers out into this group, and people start to respond, and they're smarter people than you, so don't talk for a while, just learn. And I said, fine. So started reading a lot of the research that he had sent me, and I would respond to him, kind of in brief executive summaries, things I thought about, papers and whatnot. And then I kept bugging him about wanting to spend time with him, and he said the list for his internship was 18 months long. So okay, I'll wait. And he called me one Friday and he said, I had a physician coming from China. Her visa got denied. So can you be here on Monday? Sure. So I dropped everything. I went and spent 2 weeks with him, saw every patient with him, truly got an amazing glimpse at what holistic health was. And, he had patients he had for 50 years, knew everything about them, every single thing. But, their family, their friends, their social life, and obviously, of course, all about their human health. We just, built a great rapport over that 2 weeks. And when I left there, he called me the next week and he said, "Why don't you come out and work for him?" He liked what I was, educating people about, nutritionally and training. So he said, you can learn from me. And then after I'm done, treating the patients, you're more than welcome to, bring them into your fold and, take them on as clients. I'm happy to do that. So we kind of had a symbiotic relationship. So I moved out to Ohio and spent 18 months with him, learning a lot. Got to train with, the late, great Louis Simmons. Got to, spend time with Dave Tate and Elite FTS and Matt Wenning at Wenning Strength, and learned so many different types of training from a lot of the greats. Spent, a couple different times up in Canada. Eric and I would travel up there for seminars, and we would spend time with a couple old Mr. Universes and learn a lot about training and nutrition, just a lot of great stuff. Then after about a year and a half, he was, kind of pushing me to do more and whatnot. He said, there's a great university down the street. Why don't you go back to school? I said, okay. So I started going to Ohio State, and great university. Met a lot of great people there, learned a lot of great things. The late great Bill Kramer, was there, and I learned from him, and, kind of one of the OGs in strength and conditioning, and did some research kind of personally with Pancreatic Cancer Lab, and then did some work with another cancer lab that looked at strength conditioning with patients coming out of remission, and giving them strength coaches and seeing how over a 12-week period, directly out of remission, how it affected their quality of life and all these different factors to get publications out, which was an awesome experience. That leads up to about 2018, and was studying physiology and cell biology. Undergrad was boring, so I started taking graduate classes as an undergrad. Just trying, begging, borrowing, and stealing from professors to say, "Hey, let me take this class. I can do it." So really enjoyed that. I took the whole spectrum, and I was also interested in pharmacology. So I ended up working at Contact, and up taking two courses at Harvard from pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics to learn more about, how drugs work in and around the system of the body. And, for a while I was helping a lot of bodybuilders, with their performance enhancement and to be smarter, to be healthier, right? Because that's rampant in those communities, and education quite often is the barrier to entry. So around 2018, the National Veterans Memorial Museum was built in Columbus, Ohio. And I went to the opening of it because I had always, since, to me, what I thought I had not served my first National Guard contract to be honorable. My dad died almost immediately after getting in, and I just felt like I treaded water as a soldier and didn't contribute to the organization in a positive way. And I had a deep cellular need to serve honorably and get back in service and do it again and do it the right way. Didn't know how to do that. Didn't know the right way to go about that, given the path that I was on. And I went to the grand opening of the National Veterans Memorial Museum, heard Colin Powell speak, phenomenal. Got to, shake his hand briefly. And I also heard the president and CEO at the time, Lieutenant General Mike Farrer, speak. And General Fair ended up being the president of that. And, I said, maybe this is the way I can get back into the veteran community. So I signed up to be a part of the first wave of volunteers at that museum. I was the only one under the age of 65 that volunteered because everyone else is retired. But I didn't care. It was awesome place to give back to veterans in that community. Got really connected there. And General Fair is such a phenomenal leader and human. He, his last post, he was CG of IMCOM, and he brought combatives to the Army. He's a 3-stripe black belt in jiu-jitsu. So he ended up being my professor, and we started doing these awesome little, what he called hands-on inspired leadership seminars. We did them to the National Guard. We do them to wounded warriors. Just hands-on inspired leadership is his way of teaching leadership skills and capability, and kind of molding it with jiu-jitsu, which was a great time for me. I got to learn a lot from him. He's such a phenomenal person. And through my relationship with General Fair, he kind of started to ping me for deeper questions about, why I wanted to be a part of the veteran community, and, about my service, and, started to open up to him about what I wanted to do. And he pushed me back into service, which is, I can say I would not be serving today if it wouldn't be for him. We still keep in contact all the time. He's a awesome man. So, move up to January of 2020. I'm living in Columbus, and I had just built the most epic home gym because I lived right across the street from Rogue. And, at the time I've always had Italian Mastiffs, kind of Corsos, and the Rogue Bella Bar is named after the Rogue owner's cane corso. And I had a female cane corso named Bella, and we just became friends. And, right before COVID, I'm not sure a lot of people know this, but, Rogue sponsors a ton of, competition stuff around the world. And they usually send them brand new equipment, and they send it back. So what happens, that equipment usually gets sold kind of like a fire sale. So I end up, going in there every weekend and just cleaning the house. And I built the greatest home gym ever, 3 weeks before COVID hit, and I was like, this is great. I don't have to go anywhere. School shut down, and I was like, maybe this is the time. I was 30 at the time, and I looked at, kind of the age for service and what was capable. And, I said, I can continue my education at any point, but I can't always serve. So joined the Army in 2020, middle of COVID, did basic training a second time. That was a good time, especially during COVID at Fort Benning. And that's how my service started.
Were you a yellow phase guy? Like, you went through like full COVID basic?
Oh yeah, 22 weeks.
Oh God.
I gotta ask, because you just casually rattled off like pretty much every single name in the history of bodybuilding / strength and conditioning as like a friend of yours, or someone you worked with, or someone who mentored you. I'm fairly certain you hit every single one. I didn't hear Arnold Schwarzenegger's name, but I'm fairly confident you've met him and you just haven't told us. So I got to ask you this: with all of that kind of education, so to speak, I want to put you on the spot. What are your 3 biggest takeaways for you as you define like holistic health, or a holistic approach to health, combining all of that knowledge?
Definitely. For me, the non-physical realms, and I'll use kind of H2F lingo, if you will, the way you sleep, the way you eat, the way you mentally prepare, and your meaning and purpose. If that isn't aligned, it doesn't really matter what your goal is. I don't feel like you're going to really move out and be efficient at executing that. That's number one. Number two, training can be boring, right? And progressing is boring, right? And there's so much social learning theory going on, on the social medias we do, and conjugate, let's change up everything. But truly progressing and getting stronger, and picking things to get better at, and just grinding it out is not sexy. It takes time. Number two. And number three, I would just say surround yourself with people who know more than you. I constantly try to do that, and soak up as much as I can, and then live, learn, and pass that on.
All right. Tons of knowledge there, tons of wisdom. I'm going to kind of somewhat abruptly bring us to present day here. You lead the H2F effort for the old guard now, but the old guard, and I don't know if this is like acceptable terminology anymore, but it's what would commonly be referred to as a non-resource unit, right?
Mhm.
Meaning the Army has not given the old guard any dedicated H2F staff or resources, such as you trying to put this thing together.
They gave the old guard Spencer Posey though, and
They
that's
sure
all you
did.
need.
So, like, given that, one, how did you find yourself or get yourself into a position to be doing that at the old guard? And then two, what does it look like in a unit like that? Because you've clearly put together something pretty special, and there's a ton of units out there trying to crack that code. What does that look like?
Good question. When I got to the old guard in 2021, I was put into a line company in 1st Battalion, and I started doing funerals. And someone my size, they're going to put on caskets. So I ended up carrying caskets, and I did a lot of funerals. And uh, after a couple months, and sometimes over a 2-week period, I think the highest volume we did in 2 weeks, we did 77 funerals. Um, that had a significant impact on me. Hearing taps 5 times a day. I put my father in the ground at taps, my grandfather. Um, I was still getting emotional about that, right? It hits an emotional chord as a human. And at that point, being an established adult, I said, hey, I have resources. This is my home. I know how to handle this, but it's still affecting me. And, I still have to actively put effort into resting and recovering spiritually, mentally, physically from just the job. And at the time, I went to one of the senior enlisted, let's say, sergeant majors of the organization, and I had a frank conversation with him. I said, hey, if I'm an established human and I'm having issues with this because it is a very morbid, solemn job, how do you think this is affecting our first term 18 to 24-year-old soldiers who maybe don't have those skills? And he verbatim told me, it doesn't affect them. It's just their job. They get it done.
So they had nothing in place to address that side.
Nothing.
It was just a job.
Yes, nothing.
And was the real quick was the because you mentioned sort of the I guess op tempo might be the wrong word, but 70 plus funerals in 2 weeks, right?
Mhm.
Was that standard? I mean, that's what these first term guys, that's like regular.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's regular.
And they'd never thought to address kind of the mental interesting. Okay.
No, there was no system or program of record to allow soldiers to take a knee if they needed to. There wasn't any. I mean, that we have installation MFLAX, and we have a behavioral health officer at the MTF, but nothing as far as a program to allow soldiers, left and right limits to explore recovery, whatever that looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And so I took a look around after doing that, and I said, and I started to implement a lot of my training knowledge and skills at the company level, and it did well. I mean, I was putting the entire company through training in the morning, and we were getting strong and good things, but I knew that as I saw that, I said, I think I can have a bigger effect on this organization, and H2F had come out a year before, and when I read it, I said, well, geez, I've been practicing this in some way, shape, or form for the last half of a decade. Whether it's with Dr. Serrano or whatever, we just didn't call it this. But we knew what it was, so it was home for me. I knew how to talk about it. I knew how to employ it. So I maneuvered my way up to the brigade level 3 shop, just by working some different relationships that I had built there, and said, hey, I'd want to try this. Can I come up here? Got into the 3 shop, got an understanding of how the brigade worked, having led in some capacity in academics and industry, and now stepping into the military realm. It was starting fresh. Didn't really understand, as a newer soldier, how brigade level assets work, how they, staff syncs and staff update briefs, and how the 3 shop put out fragos and warnos and all these things. So as I started to pick that up, I continued to look into programs of record at the brigade, and didn't see them. And I started writing a standard operating procedure for how I believed the old guard could move out towards H2F. It took about 2 weeks to write it. It was maybe 20 pages. And one day I took it down to the brigade commander and I said, sir, this is an Army program. We need to do this. This is how I believe we should do it. And I've been doing it for a long time. And that's been my job ever since.
He was receptive to that.
Yeah.
What
Nice.
rank were you at the time you put that on his desk?
A specialist.
So with that in mind,
He didn't say you're just a dumb bodybuilder because he's buddies with Eric Serrano.
No, I will tell you though that I have my time in the three shops has been challenging. I've had multiple threes and sergeant majors tell me verbatim that you're just a junior enlisted, or you're just a sergeant. You're not going to do anything. And I outlasted them, and I did something.
Funny how that works.
so I think that's perfect because there's a huge number of people out there across the Army, out there across the military in general, who want to make a change in their unit's culture of health and fitness, but they don't feel like they have the power. So, like you proving it can be done as a specialist at a brigade level or a regiment level, essentially just kind of making H2F happen on your own. What advice would you give to people who feel like they're in that situation where they see what needs to happen, they have the tools to help make it happen, but they don't feel like they have the power to influence what's going on?
My advice would be that, there are a lot of people in Army organizations who have opinions about what certain people might do. Go to the decision maker. Go direct. Now obviously come with a well thought out solution to whatever problem you're bringing. But one, you go direct to the decision maker. You ask them what they care about, because and I did take that from H2F, is that it is a brigade level or brigade commander's program. So one of my first questions is, sir, is what do you want out of your soldiers? And at the time, right now, currently our brigade commander is Colonel Rowland, and he said, I want to lower risk to soldiers. The old guard, for non initial entry soldiers, NCOs and officers, they have to apply to come here, and it's an application process that kind of digs into soldiers. There's a lot of tons of interaction with senior level leaders. I mean, just on our post, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs lives here. General George, Sergeant Major of the Army. We're constantly in front of senior leaders, and they want to make sure that the people who come to this organization represent the Army well. So one of those things is just looking at their physical performance, right? So less than 1% of our organization fails ACFTs. We have very few ABCP failures. So physical issues outside of Staff Sergeant Snuffy saying, hey, we should go on a ruck run up and down Arlington Hills, and creating MSKIs. Outside of that, a lot of our issues are non-physical, right? So it's the guys at the tomb or the MPs that have altered shift schedules and their sleep and issues, and alcohol is a big problem. Economics in the National Capital Region are huge stressors on our soldiers. It is ridiculous to live here. Some of our formation are food insecure. So he wanted to lower those things. He wanted to lower, alcohol events. He wanted to lower soldiers putting, hands on others or, their spouses. And, that's by leaning in on the non-physical domains.
Does and I have another question for you, but this just came to mind as you were saying that. And we've kind of talked about this, I think, a little bit prior, but it's interesting because your organization is very, I guess civilian facing might be like a weird way of phrasing it, but like your job is literally to be the image of the Army for most civilians. Yeah. Does that play into the culture at all when it comes to H2F in terms of looking a certain way, carrying yourself a certain way? Does that create an interesting kind of mindset? Like, I don't really know. I'm wondering if that plays a role in all of this for you guys.
I think maybe subcutaneously, maybe, but it's not part of, the vernacular narrative that we talk about. Our part of our job is to tell the Army story to the nation and the world. It's part of the Old Guard Creed, et cetera. So I think that itself is on the surface, is that we are constantly being looked at. We are the most videoed and photographed unit in the entire DoD. and we're always forward facing, like you said. So I think that is always at the mind of leaders, and how we look, how we act, and how we represent the Army. Absolutely.
So then my question was, I mean, you said you wrote 20 pages and put it on the brigade commander's desk. I'm curious, what does your program look like?
So my program really spoke to collaboration over competition, right? So I looked around. There's so many good resources in the National Capital Region. I said, number one, we got to bring them all to the table. And and once he said, move out, it took me about 2 months to build the type of relationships I needed. Down at Fort Belvoir, I went to the physical therapy department. I went to the occupational therapy department. I went to the Armed Forces Wellness Centers. I went to the Ready and Resilience Centers. I went to CHAMP. I went to Walter Reed. And I just started trying to build relationships with all these resources and say, hey, we want to do this for my organization. I know that most of the people I just said, they take care of my organization, but not directly or direct access to care. Our soldiers have to go to them. So I brought them all to the table and said, how can we put a closer, direct access to care? How can we truly wrap our arms around this organization and make meaningful interventions that have positive metrics to show that we are doing this in a non-resource environment? We're just bringing the same people to the table and maybe adding a little bit of time and another task to these providers, but they care and they do care about these soldiers, so it's important.
So you talked about kind of just walking into a bunch of organizations around the National Capital Region and asking for help, and it seems like
you're not a small dude. You're a big dude. I'm picturing you walking into an Army hospital.
He's kicking down doors. He's making his presence known.
Let me get some of your physical therapists. Like, okay.
So it seems like you've taken that approach and just kind of continued it as you've moved out with all the stuff you're doing. This is like zero exaggeration here, just looking up like stuff you've been up to in the last 4 to 6 months or something like that. I saw briefing the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I saw hanging out with General George. I saw getting invited to speak at least 1 or 2 universities on panels. You starred, and this will be in the show notes, you starred in an ad on NBC. That's a pretty outrageous level of hustle.
He was on Mops and Mo's.
Also on Mops and Mo's, you're right. That's probably the biggest deal of the list. But you're still like you're a sergeant, you're an infantryman, and you are out here having like a massively kind of outsized presence, influence on the space, things like that. Has that, like, one, how are you pulling all that off? But 2, has that helped the program you're trying to establish?
I think, well, I guess, how am I pulling it off? I care a lot about this, and it's just taking care of people. It's the right thing to do. I think that the soldier population is a population that's quite often forgotten about. We somewhat care about them. We kind of use and abuse them during their lifespan as soldiers, and then we boot them out the door. And they generally leave a lot worse than they come in, and that's public health data that's widely available. That to me is the wrong answer. So anything I can do to improve the health and performance and lives of soldiers while I'm in, I'm going to do it. I have enough experience. I can lead that way, and I've lived that life. I know from being a junior service member as a young man that I could have used something like this. I could have used some love in a variety of ways. And so that's kind of, how am I doing this? And what was the second one?
How has that impacted what you're doing at the Old Guard? Has it brought resources to the table? Has it made things easier, harder, different?
Absolutely. I think that it has brought tremendous awareness to the Old Guard. We've built relationships and collaborated with Gatorade. We've done it with George Washington University. I'm now an official investigator for Walter Reed, doing research at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, and with a couple of the line companies, where we're bringing the Old Guard to light. And just a couple of weeks ago, when I was at the H2F symposium, you were in the room. General Klein said the Old Guard will get an H2F team, right? And that's from, I believe, lobbying that our soldiers are important, and we deserve to be taken care of as well.
Do you think that being a non-resourced, maybe like unaffiliated is the wrong word, but like it almost seems like that has given you the ability to do more than most H2F teams. And I say that as somebody who's on like an affiliated H2F team. There's a lot more red tape involved in getting things done. I mean, you're kind of rattling off there a lot of the things like working with Gatorade, working with the university, Walter Reed. That, like, I guess you could say that's within the realm of possible for a conventional, funded unit. But by that same token, it seems to be at least a lot harder. So have you found that you've had an easier time making those moves because you're kind of out in the wilderness, or do you still struggle?
I think it's easier for me to be innovative with moving out towards getting results here. Like I said, the national capital region is ripe with organizations and institutions that have resources and want to help. They just often don't know how. A lot of times I've entered rooms shaking hands, and that's really all it took. They just didn't know how to bridge that gap. And I think that throughout my life, I've gained a skill, and that's sometimes I say I talk in three languages. I can talk private, I can talk commander, I can talk general officer, or I can talk, undergrad, I can talk grad, and I can talk, terminal degree. I can liaise between different people to really get the meaning across as to what we want to do and how we want to move out.
Is your ops R major in the three shop still tell you to shut up and color?
No, he got out of the army, but he has LinkedIn messaged me, and he is a supporter now, so that's great.
There we go.
Slide into your DMs, LinkedIn's, I don't know,
LinkedIn's.
LinkedIn's.
So, as you say all this stuff, it kind of brings me back to my last job on active duty and something that I started to struggle with there, which was once you get that chance to go like full steam ahead on something you're passionate about, it can become very difficult, very daunting to look down the road at going back to quote unquote normal army stuff. What does the future hold for you? What's next that
That's
you
a great
can tell
question.
us?
Yeah, that you can tell us.
That's a great question. So I always, I keep very flat comms across both my regiment or brigade and or the division as to what I do, and I've done collaborative efforts with the Air Force and some other entities around the Army enterprise. And so I've always kept that, like I said, flat with my commanding general. And just a couple months ago, I was presenting some data to him and showing him kind of how we move the needle here at the old guard, and with some of our objective subjective data. And he looked at me and he said, first, he said, Spencer, the first thing I want to say is the fact that we are paying you as a sergeant to me is criminal. And he said, second, do I have to involuntarily reenlist you? And I said, you don't do that, sir. But I said, if I'm going to stay in uniform, this is all I want to do. So can we find a way to make that happen? And my brigade commander had told me, and he related to the general, that he thought that my skills had elevated above a brigade level, and that I needed to look out and lead over a larger organization. So I can tell you that the process is in motion and full steam ahead to see what that looks like at a division or higher level, managing human performance in some way, shape, or form, specifically in the military district of Washington. And more follow on that. And I have some pretty large meetings here in the middle of June that will decide kind of where that path leads. If I'm going to stay in uniform, I've been very clear that taking care of people and leading in this capacity is all I want to do. And I think that people up the larger food chain are ready to play ball with that.
So typically this is one of my closing questions, but I'm going to ask you right now because I think it fits with where you're going. You're rising up the chain, so to speak. And so I'm curious if at some point, hypothetically, although with you it sounds like realistically, but hypothetically you were given kind of the keys to the castle and we're told, hey, like make H2F or whatever you want to call it, like whatever it is, make it whatever you want it to look like. We will give you unlimited resources, make it happen. What are kind of some big rocks for you? What would that look like?
One is I was kind of raised, I guess, if you will, in the old guard is taking care of that organization. It does mean a lot to me, and so do those soldiers. So one, taking care of them and making sure that they have the resources and direct access to care that other people do. And I'm in the process of trying to get them some of these resources that H2F team has as we lean forward before we get a team. To one, take care of them. Two, in the larger, let's say, national capital region, we have, thousands and thousands of soldiers, airmen, sailors that don't get this type of love. To me, the Army's leading the way with H2F, and it continues to evolve and adapt, and it will do that as it should. But I've been to other DoD entities. I've been to the Air Force and seen what their OST teams look like. I've seen their optimized and human weapon system for their pilots. I've collaborated with Marine strength conditioning coaches, and I see what they have, and I've talked to the Navy about what they have, and the other services are a little behind. Right now, I spent about a month back in February. I was asked by the Air Force to speak at their inaugural Lifestyle and Performance Medicine Summit. And at that time, I got to speak with the Air Force Surgeon General, Lieutenant General Miller, and I grabbed him for a couple of minutes and I said, "Sir, are you talking across the proverbial hall about how you're, sharing best practices, reducing redundancies, and, aligning efforts?" And he said, "No." And I said, "Well, are you open to doing that? Is someone in your office open to do it?" And he said, "Absolutely." So I spent about a month with a retired Air Force surgeon creating a proposal that took some of the ingredients that I did at the old guard and some other metrics, and to create a proposal for a national capital region joint kind of pilot, if you will, to show that we can use the same interventions across different services and get the same metrics and still allow those services to add their little seasoning, whatever they want, whatever they want to do as far as fitness testing, whatever. But and we called it operationalizing total force fitness, right? That's a document that came out a decade ago, and it has some metrics and it has some interventions, and they're a little outdated. But if we can unite human performance across the DoD space, I think that has a lot of value, and it would reduce a lot of redundancy, save a lot of money, and improve the health and welfare of our total force.
Do you think, okay, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I've noticed that that's become a thing that's come up a little bit more frequently. And we may have actually even talked about it at the symposium, but you've got the Army doing what they're doing. You're hearing whiffs of the Air Force doing it. Certainly the Navy has kind of, from where I sit, it's sort of inevitable that this type of thing is going to become widespread. And I guess in that, though, you could argue that there's a risk of it becoming sort of watered down in the same way that a lot of the other insert three-letter acronym military program designed to help soldiers has done. So I guess maybe here's the question for you is, like, how do you see hypothetically a DoD level human performance organization, one, avoiding the bureaucracy of something that size, while two, still addressing the human factor, which we struggle to do already at this level?
Well, I can say that I am acutely learning the bureaucracy. That proposal that I just told you about is at the level of the chairman of Joint Chiefs, is at the Joint Surge, and I'm dealing with their team and that process. And there's a civilian that runs the program for total force fitness, and working with that. And
do they ever ask if you're lost when an E5 walks into the joint offices and stuff?
No, I haven't had. That hasn't happened yet. But if it does, I'll let you know. You just act like you belong.
You're way too deep in the bureaucracy right now. This is
so number one, I'm just getting into that. So how I see that moving forward, I'm not sure. I think that the framework and concept of H2F, and we heard this at the symposium that, if they're going to look at a solution that, encompasses the entire Compo 1, it's got to be watered down a little bit, right? Because we just don't have that amount of professionals. And then if we scale that to the larger DoD, well, then it's even more. But I'm a firm believer that, if your heart's in the right place, and so is the program of record, that it will achieve a positive effect. There is, lowered returns on something like that, but it is still better than nothing, right? And if we can get that goodness out, even if it's spread a little bit thin, if we use technology, if we leverage different resources to get those professional skills out there, whether it's connected virtually, whatever it is, it definitely can have a profound effect on the humans that operate the warfighting space.
So I got to ask you though, because everything you've sort of rattled off thus far in terms of accomplishments and what you've built is undoubtedly dependent upon you and your personality type and your ambition. So specific, I think, to the old guard, if you left tomorrow, would what you've built, your H2O program, would that sustain itself, or is it kind of tied to Spencer Posey?
I think it's a little bit of both. I had sat down with the regimental commander, and he said, can we find a 50% solution for you? And I said, yeah, probably. What I have done, I've codified into the annual training guidance. We've created some continuity there with the program that I have built, how to continue that down the line. I think that what will probably be lost if and when I do leave this organization is, some of the connections and partnerships that I've built with outside entities that, continue to bolster the old guard. So whether it's, Walter Reed or Gatorade or other organizations that, have contributed to this program and taken care of soldiers, I'm not sure who will backfill me yet. I was told it could be an officer, NCO, private, it doesn't matter, right person, right place, right job. But hopefully they'll have the ability to carry forward, and I'll bridge that gap with whoever that is, and kind of left seat, right seat, and set them up for success as much as I can, and hopefully those will continue. But like I said earlier, my plan is to stay at the division level at NDW so I can keep an eye on the old guard and keep showing them as much love as I can.
So we've talked a lot about the relationship building and the strategic stuff and like where you're going with it. I don't want to miss the opportunity before we let you go here. I'm sure there are people listening who are at the company level, the battalion level, the brigade level, whatever, and want to implement something like what you're doing on a very tactical level, like a calendar level. What does your program look like? If I'm a soldier in the old guard, what would I run into because of your program that I wouldn't have seen before? Is there weekly battle rhythm stuff? Is there just resources that they're pointed to a little bit more effectively? What does it actually look like to a soldier?
Right now, it looks like a little bit of both. So on the calendar, it looks like getting in for injury prevention with the physical therapist during PT. It looks like leaders having turf talks about sleep, about mental health. It looks like resources at the company level, like cookbooks that teach, that are really, short and sweet cookbooks on how to eat how to cook and eat efficiently in the barracks. There are meal prep classes on the weekends that we hold to teach soldiers how to cook efficiently, how to cook for themselves, to give them that kitchen confidence. We've held sleep, I guess you would call competitions, right? Where we incentivize soldiers. It's kind of a choose your own adventure. If you have, wearable, a group of soldiers say, hey, we want to do a sleep competition. Okay, great. Over the course of the weekend, whoever sleeps the most quality, best quality and duration, they get a late call later the next week, right? So incentivizing those positive behaviors. And then individual commanders are empowered to move out within our formation, with H2F in ways that, they find innovative, and that, they call me and they say, hey, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? So we have changed the culture, specifically, I'd say one of the biggest wins was our data on sleep and the implementation of kind of some reverse cycle PT within our organization. allowing soldiers, more time in the morning. A lot of our, companies are, having their first formations at 0845 or 0830, somewhere around there. Nothing about the battle rhythm is getting lost. No significant changes in their ACFT scores. So the CG saw that as a big win. And we're pushing forward, leaning forward as far as some local contracts for what we can do in the space and time before we get a team, and then creating some continuity at the company, battalion, and then regimental level. We've empowered our MFTs, or H2FIs, if you will. We only have a few individuals in our organization who have gone to H2FI. But the MFTs that we have and MRTs, we have empowered them and given them true advisor capability at echelon to inform their commanders about the ways they should be changing those formations for the better as far as H2F.
So it sounds like, H2F is a priority for your senior leadership. You're talking about MFTs being able to be MFTs, and you're talking about reverse cycle PT. It's interesting because it's all things that you hear over and over and over again, and then our organization's actually doing it, not necessarily. So it sounds like you have found that it's gone well.
Absolutely. And we've proven that and executed that through data. When I first went to the brigade commander, I had a plan for the entire brigade, and he said, well, let's pilot it with the company, right? We did that, and that's where we had amazing data come from that. And he's kind of allowed me to move forward incrementally as we get more data and prove this. And he was super forward leaning. And then we got an amazing brigade sergeant major who came up from Fort Jackson, who stood up that first performance center, Timothy K Performance Center. So he's all in. He's just a ball of energy when it comes to H2F. He just lights up. So it's great to have leaders at the top of the organization that are invested in it. They talk about it. They use it in their counselings. They talk about it at weekly staff meetings, and it's integrated into the culture because we talk about it. And to me, I hate using the word culture because I truly believe that it is a series of behaviors that are portrayed across an organization at the incremental level. And if we have a brigade sergeant major who, even on his calendar, right, his personal calendar on Outlook, in the morning it says physical fitness H2F. At lunch it says nutrition H2F. Right, at night it says sleep H2F, because he reminds himself that this is what we're doing and this is how we get into that, and that's awesome.
Man, all right. Before we let you go, it's been an hour. I want to take you back to your bodybuilding days. I'd be remiss if I didn't pull this one out of you, but I want to know, what is the best split?
He's thinking harder about this than any of the.
I was going to say, all his other comments were very well placed, but now he's like, man, oof.
Okay. For me, as a male and as I've gotten older, it's training every other day. With some sort of progressive overload and deloads every fifth week, and incorporating a decent amount of aerobic capacity work. When I stopped training every day with this bro split, and I started training every other day, my hunger for the gym came back, number one. Because on that day off, I'd be like, man, it's 5 o'clock. What do I do with this hour and a half now? So I became a more productive human, number one. I got the fire back. And then because you're getting that whole day of calories, into recovery, and you can focus on sleep, when I changed to that, I put on almost 15 to 20 pounds of muscle in like 6 months. I got wicked strong. That's really how I became the human that I am today, is by resting more, focusing more on progressive overload and the logbook, right? So many folks I know they never log anything. So how do you know if you're progressing if you're not taking some sort of data? And like I said earlier, with one of the first things we talked about, it's not sexy. You're picking something a couple of things you want to get good at, and you're grinding away. You're progressing, you're deloading, you're progressing, you're deloading, you're peaking, and then you're doing it all over again.
So we talking like full body? We talking push pull legs? Like, what do you?
Well, my upper days are generally upper. Uh, my lower days, incorporate power. A lot of posterior chain. I focus a lot on my posterior chain, and that's something I learned from, like I said, like Charles Poliquin. Posterior chain is where it's at. Got to keep the volume of your posterior chain at least double that of your anterior chain. Um, it's where a lot of your power as a human comes from, and so many people they miss that. GPP. I learned that from Louis Simmons and Matt Wenning. Massive amounts of GPP. Anyone who's ever met Matt Wenning has learned of his Wenning warm ups. He's doing 4 sets of 25. For warm ups with benching, squatting, reverse hypers. The amount of volume is ridiculous, and as we know, you have to get stronger and bigger over time. You got to continually stress and provide new stimulus to get that adaptation.
So I'm curious about this because we have asked this question before, and I think as I'm looking back on it, it comes mostly from CrossFit types. And so I'm curious from a bodybuilding perspective, if you were on a desert island, what is one piece of gym equipment you would take with you? You guys like your machines, and that doesn't necessarily
Desert island.
Desert island.
Probably a sled.
As soon as Louis Simmons guy's gonna say a sled.
You can do so much with a sled. I mean, if that's all I got, yeah. I'd say my favorite piece of gym equipment is my belt squat.
Okay.
My belt squat and my reverse hyper, but do a lot of sleds.
I'm picturing Spencer on like a tiny tropical island with a sled full of coconuts, just getting after it.
That's awesome. All right, man. Before we let you go, where can people, aside from Googling you, because you're all over the internet, but like specifically, where can people find you? How can they get a hold of you? Do you want them to get a hold of you?
Sure. I'm happy to relay anything I've learned, to pass on, to people in units who want to get after it and need some direction how. So, like, is it acceptable to put out my mail email here?
Sure. Do whatever you want.
If you're good with it, I'll put that in the show notes if that's something you're down for.
Sure, I'll put my mail email in the show notes, and then I'm on LinkedIn. I don't post a lot anymore on Instagrams just because my algorithm is awful. But LinkedIn and mail email is definitely a place to find me. So we'll put that in the show notes.
Awesome, cool. Man. Well, thanks for hopping on board. It's good to see you.
Absolutely. It's always good to see you, Drew, Alex as well. Definitely enjoyed getting to know you guys over the last couple of years, with the interactions we had. I know, Alex, you helped me pave the way. I know I reached out to you, when I got to the old guard, and you connected me with a lot of very influential people in the NCR, and people who have helped guide my path. So thank you for that. I can definitely tell you that I would not have had the type of start I had without your guidance. And Drew, you've always been super helpful anytime I've asked. So thank you.
It's awesome, good that stuff helped because I don't actually know anything. I just know how to call people who know stuff. So I'm glad it was valuable for somebody.
I feel very comfortable saying that Spencer is one of the hardest working human beings I've ever encountered. Certainly in the military. Certainly in the military.
Obviously, both of us knew him before him coming on the podcast. And I think anybody who knows Spencer gets kind of the same impression of Spencer. But this is a guy who is on a different level of passionate about this problem set and these issues. Mm-hmm. He's really getting after it. It takes an uncommon level of commitment to the cause to have a specialist running an unresourced brigade level program and go from there to briefing the Joint Chiefs of Staff and having a proposal on the desk of the Surgeon General. Like there's some seriously heavy lifts being done by this guy.
Which, I mean, in terms of a takeaway, I think it goes to show you, like, if people out there listening want this type of thing, you could either sit around and wait for it, or you could create it. And I think, sure, rank obviously makes things challenging, but, guys like Spencer, and the reason why we bring him on to talk about what he's done is kind of shows that you can create stuff if you work hard enough.
And the impact is not exaggerated here, right? Like it can be easy to assume that because like Spencer is talking about his own work that there's like some extra hype going into it. I would say the opposite. I think Spencer is understating the impact some of his work has had. I know multiple general officers with Spencer on their radar that know that he's doing fantastic work that has having an outsized impact, that they're going to send majors and lieutenant colonels and colonels to go figure out what he's doing because they want to try and get on that level.
Boom. And he did mention this, and we'll say it again in the intro. Very accessible dude, like super happy to talk to people. You heard it in the episode. Very well connected, not afraid to drive from, what was it, Maryland to Ohio to make an appointment with somebody that he wants to meet. So if you were inspired by his story or are curious as to his methods, feel free to reach out. Absolutely do so, because he will help you. Hey, Alex, let's cover our ass real quick.
Oh, great idea, Drew. All right, guys. The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities they represent.
Thanks for tuning into this week's episode. Before you go, please rate and review the pod on the listening platform of your choice. You can also visit us on our website at www.mopsinmos.com. That's mops, the letter N, mos.com. You can check out the library of podcast episodes, our latest blog entries, any helpful resources, and also sign up for our newsletter.
Drew nailed it. Just to underline a couple of things, the podcast entries have in-depth show notes on the website. So if you missed anything or you want to read any of the research we talk about, it is all there. You can, at the bottom of the website, sign up with your email and receive future updates from us. The blog posts go a little bit more in depth in kind of written form on a couple of topics we get questions about all the time. But most importantly, I just want to ask all you guys, our best way the word gets out is absolutely word of mouth. So tell your friends, tell the people you work with, anybody you think would find it useful. Thanks for spreading the word.
If you have any questions or comments, feel free to shoot us an email at either Drew or Alex at mopsinmos.com.
Or there's a contact form on the website.